Good evening. The First Minister accused the UK government of a naked power grab as it began moves today to convert EU laws back to British laws. Nicola Sturgeon issued a joint statement with her Welsh counterpart saying they could not recommend legislative consent as the repeal bill stands. Earlier, they were both in Brussels to meet the EU's chief negotiator, Michel Barnier. From there, our political correspondent, Andrew Kerr, reports.
This was touchdown for a flying visit by the First Minister to meet the EU's chief negotiator, Michel Barnier, a chance to press home her own point of view on Brexit. Barely an hour was spent in Brussels. It was straight back to Scotland, where she gave her reaction on the talks.
Well, I was able to set out the Scottish Government's position. He was incredibly well briefed already on that, and make very clear what the priorities of the Scottish Government are. In particular, our strong desire to see the UK remain within the single market and the customs union, because that's best for jobs and investment and living standards. So it was a very constructive meeting.
The Conservatives took perhaps a wary view of the meeting.
I think it's absolutely right for the Scottish Government and other devolved administrations to be wanting to have their voice heard as part of these discussions. That's what the UK Government have made clear, they want that input. But at the end of the day, this is a negotiation with two seats at the table. And on the UK side, it will be led by the UK Government. And what people want is for the Scottish Government to be constructive, not obstructive, when dealing with Brexit.
Back in Brussels, Ms Sturgeon was not the only leader in town. Her first ministerial colleague, Carwyn Jones, also dropped in to give the Welsh perspective to Monsieur Barnier. And Labour's Jeremy Corbyn was keen to show he was a player, essentially saying he was ready to step into Theresa May's shoes. So Michel Barnier has made clear that these are not separate negotiations, but Theresa May must be wondering what was being discussed in there today. In some ways involving the devolved administrations and the leader of the opposition, it looks like perhaps the EU was flexing its own political muscles. Over at the European Parliament, one leading member made clear the European institutions had absolute freedom to speak to who they wanted to.
The British government talks to the Polish government, Brussels talks to the Scottish government. It's a normal procedure. As the British government talks to different people, we talk to different people. And this is, I think, a very normal procedure.
Of course, Mr Brock said that staying in the single market was the most favourable solution for the UK, but Britain was making that impossible by wanting to cherry-pick. As the sun sets on Britain's relationship with the EU, the view from those embedded in the European institutions seems to be that the UK is embarking on a risky venture. Andrew Kerr, reporting Scotland, Brussels.
And Andrew is still in Brussels for us. Andrew, lots of talking been going on, as we heard, but what's your assessment of what this meeting will have achieved for Nicola Sturgeon?
Yes, Sally, I think it's been an opportunity for Nicola Sturgeon to put her point of view across to the European Commission and make clear there are other points of view in the UK, not just that of the UK government. In fact, Jeremy Corbyn said he was sick of Theresa May's megaphone diplomacy. And of course, the EU Commission, as I was mentioning there, maybe flexing their own political muscles too, showing they're willing and capable to hear from other people as well, and not just Theresa May. But in fact, they did point out they're playing the diplomatic game there, that they can only negotiate with the UK as the member state, perhaps leaving Nicola Sturgeon perhaps a little powerless. So Theresa May have been wondering what was going on during these talks, and we had that warning there from the Scottish Conservatives to the Scottish Government not to be obstructive in the Brexit negotiations. So ultimately, Brexit is up to the UK to do what it wants, but we did have that warning as well from that leading light in the European Union. You can't have your cake and eat it.
Andrew, thank you very much indeed. Meanwhile, at Westminster, the UK government published a key part of its Brexit strategy. The repeal bill, officially known as the EU withdrawal bill, will convert existing EU legislation into British laws. Nicola Sturgeon has condemned the bill as a power grab. She issued a joint statement with the Welsh First Minister saying they won't recommend legislative consent as the bill stands. Well, our political correspondent David Porter is in Westminster for us this evening. David, to what extent is this going to set the Parliament's and, of course, the Welsh Assembly at loggerheads?
It has the potential to do it, Sally, because if, for instance, the Scottish Government and the Scottish Parliament was to reject or withhold consent, that would really create some constitutional fireworks. Now, it is worth at this point saying, I think, what the bill that is being published today after much anticipation and much hype will actually do. It will not be about the Brexit negotiations. They will go on in Brussels, but this is a very important piece of legislation about making Brexit a reality, about the mechanism of delivering Brexit and bringing EU law back to the UK. Now, you won't be surprised when I tell you that views in Scotland differ as to whether this is a good or a bad deal for the people of Scotland.
I think it's absolutely clear that there are going to be additional powers for the Scottish Parliament, additional areas in which a distinct Scottish perspective can be brought to areas of responsibility, areas where the Scottish Parliament already have some responsibilities, but the EU make some of the rules, they'll be able to do even more. So it is a powers bonanza in the sense of there being additional and significant new powers and responsibilities post leaving the EU.
We're looking at a great power grab. As powers came back, it was meant to be that the Scottish Parliament, the other devolved administrations would get more powers, but that's not what we're seeing from this repeal bill. So it's one that we've got extreme concern about, and we'll certainly be putting down amendments to it as well, and we'll be scrutinising the bill in the way it should be scrutinised.
Now, tonight, as we've been hearing, Nicola Sturgeon has weighed into the argument, saying that unless there are changes to this legislation and unless the bill is changed in somewhat, together with her counterpart in Wales, she could not recommend that either the Scottish Parliament or the Welsh Assembly gives consent to parts that would affect Wales and Scotland. If they were to withhold their consent, that potentially could cause real constitutional fireworks and would be an added complication to this process. As it stands, the MPs in the House of Commons behind me won't get a chance to look at this legislation until the autumn, but they know that when they do, it is going to be long, it is going to be protracted, and it is going to be very complicated. And because of the parliamentary arithmetic here at Westminster, it could mean that there are some very tight votes. I think most people think that the bill we see today is not the one that will end up on the statute book, and the UK government will have to compromise.
David Porter, thank you very much.